Hey, what up everybody? I am Lou, and today we're going to talk about how to access a SharePoint list. So I've been getting a lot of requests on, hey, how do we use Python to access a SharePoint list? And in the example that we're going to do, we're going to access the list. Something basic to begin with. There are other stuff you could do, and I'll talk about it in a few. But ultimately what we're doing is we're going to access the list, and then we're going to save that list to an Excel file. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so I have my text editor open. So before we get started, there's two packages that we're going to be dealing with. So if you don't have these, go ahead and get them. The first one is going to be SharePoint. So go ahead and get that installed. Ultimately, this is a package that's needed to be able to access your SharePoint site. To do many things, right? You could upload documents, download documents. In this case, we're accessing a SharePoint list, and so on. The next one is going to be OpenPy Excel. So this is the one that we're going to use to create a Excel file. So again, go ahead and get that installed as well. And we're going to be creating a workbook, a worksheet, writing our data to this worksheet and then saving it out. So again, I'll walk you through the process. Before we get started, let me show you the SharePoint site that we're going to be dealing with. Let's see, where is it? Okay. So this is the SharePoint site. I call it development because it's literally for testing. I don't have anything production or anything of true value in here. It's all for testing. So I created a list called clients. Again, you can have a list on whatever you call your list to be. In my case, again, pretty straightforward. We have the name, then we have address information, street, city, state, postal code, etc. Right. So this is just our basic sample list. So this is what we're going to be ultimately accessing. Right. So let's get started. Let's go through the process. Okay, so once you install your two packages, SharePoint, OpenPy Excel, then we could go ahead and get started. So one thing too, I guess we probably do this first. You could do it differently if you want. I normally, again, what I'm doing here is strictly for test purposes. This is not how you would do it in a production environment. You will create environment variables in your production server to bring in any kind of credentialing. In my case, I'm just going to show you this SharePoint JSON object that I have. Again, just call it SharePoint, and I would have my user, which is my email, password, a URL. So the URL would be your subdomain, whatever that may be, right? Even if you don't have a true, like your own subdomain, if it's more of a Microsoft generated version, that's fine, whatever that is. And then of course your site. So in this case would be your main URL. Then of course under sites you have some kind of site name. Now if I go back to my site name, again, it's called development, and we can see it right here, right? SharePoint, my subdomain, SharePoint.com sites, development. So that's kind of what, you go ahead and get this created, and we'll be calling it throughout the process. Now that being said, I'm going to actually put my information in here. Now I'm not going to show this going forward So you need to reference it, just kind of go back to the video, but I'm going to put my information. So let me go ahead and do that right quick. Alright, so I got that done. Alright, cool. So now, before we do our project, so I created a folder called Project PY and SharePoint PY. So let's start off with the SharePoint PY file. What we're going to do here, we're going to put in our SharePoint authentication, our SharePoint, we're going to create a function to be able to connect to a SharePoint list. We're going to build that out. It's going to make it a lot easier once we start coding it up. So let's do that. All right, so that's fine. All right, so I'm going to end up bringing in share plump import the hell I'm talking about site and Office 365. So also keep in mind, in this example, I'm dealing with a Office 365 account. Now, if you're dealing with a on-prem SharePoint site, it would be slightly different. Very similar, but there'll be some things that will be different, like your authentication. Also, it kind of depends on if you have access to the network, if it's part of the same network where you're in. Most of the time it is, if you have access to SharePoint, most likely you have access to the network to some degree. You actually call it to the directory path. Again, it's different. This video was not designed for that, so that's a whole different video, but just want to put that out there. This is strictly for Office 365. So we have SharePoint. We're also going to bring in share plump sites. Import versions. There goes version. Oops. Running the wrong one. Lowercase. Alright, there it goes. Alright, so now that we got that in order, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to have to read that JSON config file. Again, this is how I'm doing it just for the purpose of this example. This is not what you would want to do in a production environment. You would want to probably create some environment variables, and then you'll be able to just execute the call of these variables and just bring them into your project. So alright, so I'm bringing in those packages. The next thing is, let's create a root directory that I'm going to need. OS path, directory name, OS path, absolute path, and the next piece is our config. Our config path is which would be our root directory plus hold up, I forgot to put 2 forward slashes. Alright, plus the file, which in this case is config JSON. Again, I'm probably making it more difficult than what it should be, but you could just, ultimately we're calling this file. That's what we're trying to do there. Next thing, we're going to open up this file. The path config file. So So now I'm going to create a config object. We're going to load this file. So kind of going back, it's a JSON object that had a key value of SharePoint. So what I'm doing here, I'm bringing in the whole object in. Now you're going to kind of narrow that down to only bring in the attributes, the values and the keys that relate to the SharePoint key. So let's do that right quick. All right, so now that I have that in order, so now let's create our create some variables for username, config user, password, SharePoint URL, URL, SharePoint Site. All right, so now that we have those in orders, so now that we have that in order, again, ultimately what we're doing, we're just creating the string that ultimately just shows the full directory path for this file. We're reading this file, read JSON file, JSON config file, which is what we're doing. We're pretty much creating this config object. Down below, we're pretty much setting our values from the config file, to just the variable that we're going to use throughout the project. So next, I'm going to create a class. Okay, in this class, I'm going to call SharePoint. I don't need that. And I'm going to end up creating two methods in this class. One is for authentication, and the other one is for connecting to a SharePoint list. So let's do that. Yep, no parameters. So we're going to do self cookie, and we're calling Office 365. Oops. We're going to pass in SharePoint URL. So you could tell up here the first argument is SharePoint Site. So I'm just passing in the full SharePoint URL. The next thing is username. Yep, there goes below username. And then it is password. There you go, password. Yep. All right. So now that we have that in order, now we're going to create in a site instance, which in this case would be site SharePoint Site, and then versions. See how we have site URL. My name's a little bit off. That's fine, but at least you kind of understand what we're trying to do. And then we got version, right? So so version would be version v365, because again, that's what I'm dealing with here. It's an Office 365 account. And then my last argument would be auth cookies. Right now it's set to none. I want to set that to my auth cookies object that I created up here, which ultimately have my credentials. Again, the SharePoint URL, username, and password. So I'm passing that into my site. Then I'm going to return back my site object. All right, so this is strictly for authentication. The next one is going to be connect to list. All right, so ultimately, this is, again, we're connected to a SharePoint list, which is what we're doing here. I do want to pass in we'll call it list name. Because again, we could be trying to connect to many other lists, SharePoint list. Okay, so now that we got that, I'm going to end up creating an all-site object, which ultimately it's calling this method up here on top. I'm going to call it, let's call it list data all site list. So see where we have right here list name. That's ultimately what we're going to end up passing in. So list name equals list name. And this is the argument up here on top. So you know what, to make it a little bit easier, just make sure there's no confusion. ls name. So at least you know that's what this is up here, right? These two go together. At the end of it, there is another function that we're going to end up calling, which is called get list items. So we're pretty much determining what list we want, but then within this class we have this other method of what we're trying to do. In this case, we're trying to get the list items, which is ultimately what we want. Then we're going to do a return list data. All right. So just kind of go back and to reiterate, we are creating the full path of our config file. Again, you want to hard code it in, that's fine. You could do that as well. We're reading the file, and then we're setting the SharePoint keys and values under the config object. All right, so below that, we're then setting our username, password, SharePoint, so on. Again, this is the way I did it. You could just call these directly if you want and just call them over here, and you kind of avoid the whole section. That's fine. Just the way I did it anyways. And so next we create a SharePoint class. The first method that we have is a auth method. We ultimately, to authenticate, we need to connect to the SharePoint, and that's what we're doing here. One thing I want to notate though, if you have a SharePoint site, again, Office 365 account, and you have multi-factor authentication set up, you're going to have issues. This is not going to work. So there's a few workarounds to work around that, but it's more of a like ideally you have to probably create a new user where that user doesn't have multi-factor authentication, and then on top of that, they're very limited on what access they have, very specific to what you wanted to do, and then you use that account to be able to connect. Again, I can make a video about it, on why that's the case, but this wouldn't work if you're just set up that way. Let's see. All right, so now that we have our SharePoint set up, now let's go to our project file. Okay, so our project file, okay, so now let's go to our project file. So in this project file, the first thing we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up importing that. Let me do it this way. we're going to end up importing this SharePoint class. All right, so let's go ahead and call the SharePoint file import SharePoint. Got it. The next thing we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up importing OpenPy Excel workbook, because we're going to be creating a workbook, right? So that's the whole purpose behind this. All right, so now I'm going to just put some notes. Get client SharePoint list. That's the first thing we're going to do. Again, let me kind of go back to, this is a SharePoint list that we're going to test out and we're going to get back, right? So ultimately, that's the first thing that we need to do. So now let's do that. And I'm going to call this clients SharePoint get client list. In my case, my list is called clients. If you're not for sure, it should be the name that you have on the side. Nevertheless, once you're in it, let's see, the URL should tell you as well, right? So in this case, you have your site name, list, and then of course in mine it says clients. So that's how you could determine what it is. So let's take a quick look at it, right? Now that we kind of have everything in order, before we continue on, let me go ahead and let's take a look, right? So let me go ahead and run it. Project PY. What happened here? Okay, let's hold up. I got an error. So let's see what's happening. Oh, I know what I forgot. So in my Office 365 class that I call, right, there's another message that I should have called at the end, which is called get cookies, and I forgot to include that in here. All right, so let's go ahead and try it again. Okay, there you go. So as we can see, this is our data that we have here. You'll see the first section, we have like a $1 $. Ultimately, this is pretty much your row number. So we got 1. Where's number 2 at? There goes number 2 over here. If we look at some of the data, we'll see we have address info, postcode, right? Where's the name at? Title, there it goes. So we have Mark, and then down below we have Jan, which again, if I go to my, there it goes, Mark and Jan, right? So that's pretty much what we're pulling back. All right, so just want to make sure to show you how the data actually looks. So the next thing that we're going to do, all right, so before I go any further, what we just did right now was the very basics of authenticating a SharePoint and pulling a list of SharePoint. Now there's other features you could do in SharePoint. For example, you could filter. So let's say you have a SharePoint list of 5,000 entries, right? Just picking a number. Well, you could filter to those entries. There's a capability to apply a filter. I'll do a video on that if you're interested. Kind of show you some examples on how to filter. The main purpose was here just kind of show you how to connect and how to pull a SharePoint list, access it, right? Once you access it, then you can do whatever you want to it. You could do something programmatically, parse the values, call an API, save it. I mean, it's up to you. What we're going to do here next, though, we're going to next create it to an Excel file and save it. And this kind of like a good idea for this would be if you have a client where different people are entering data into a SharePoint list, and then maybe, the client wants the customer, whoever, the business wants to see a report of that data at the end of the month. You could pull it, kind of what I'm doing. So, but we're going to create an Excel file next. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to create Excel workbook. Okay. So I'm going to call it WB for workbook. Yep, there you go. WB workbook. So I'm calling the workbook class. Oops. The next thing I'm going to create my destination file path. Ultimately, this is where are you going to save this file? In my case, I'm going to just call it client list, and I'm going to save it on the same folder where I'm at. You could save this anywhere else. Again, you could just specify the path and where you want it to go. I'm just going to create it in the same folder. Alright, so the next thing is going to be create worksheet. So let's do WS for worksheet equals workbook dot active. Alright, so what I'm doing here by using the WB active, I'm just pretty much saying, hey, just give me the just kind of create a default worksheet. You could do other stuff. You create specific like mini worksheets and access them differently. I'm just activating one. That's all I'm doing. I'm gonna assign a title to it. So in my case, it will be worksheet title, and let's call it client list. Right, pretty straightforward. So the next thing is going to be setting SharePoint list values to Excel cells. All right, so this is the whole. We're going to start writing it to an Excel worksheet object, and then once we do that, then we'll save it. So let's go ahead and let's do that. So we're gonna do for index client in enumerate clients and one. We want it to start with the one value. If you're not familiar with what enumerate is, it's think of it as a let's say you have a list of 10 records in the list, right? 10. So ultimately what this is just kind of doing a count of each record as you iterate through it. Now you could specify your value where you want to start. By default, again in programming, your starting index is 0, right? 0. In Excel, that's not the case. It is 1. So that's why I'm specifying we want to start on 1, not 0. Alright, so next, now I'm gonna have to specify my my worksheet cell column equals 1 for my first value, because I know what column I'm placing it in. Row equals the index on which row I'm in, right? Because again, I'm iterating over each row, ultimately what I'm doing. And then my value. And my value is going to be client. So my first one is going to be title. Again, just kind of go back. I have this name, the client name, it's being the key value of it is called title. And then we have these other information, address, info, and so on. But ultimately, that's what I'm, what I'm going to have to call, which is title. Then let's go ahead and repeat the process for all the other ones. And this one is going to be address, info. Let's do street. Because again, we have a few. We have street, city, state, etc. In this case, we're gonna do street. Now let's do one more. I'm not gonna do all of them. You kind of get the idea here. Value client. City. Alright, so now that we have that, the final thing is save workbook. To do this, actually fairly easy. Workbook save. That's it. So now what we're doing, we're calling SharePoint by whatever list we want to call. So one thing too, just kind of keep in mind, I did kind of hard code in the site that we're dealing with. Of course, if you're dealing with a variable site where you have multiple sites, multiple lists, then of course, you could add another function in here to kind of specify which SharePoint site you want to access. But either way, we're just dealing with one SharePoint site here. So let's go ahead and run it. Let's try it out. And let's see if it works. It does not work. Oh, you know what? I forgot to specify my name. So this is going to be file name equals, destination file path. Alright. So now let's try it again. Alright, there you go. I saw a file pop up over here. Where is it at? There it goes. Client list Excel. Let's see. Let me go ahead and open this up. It's fine. Let me just go to. Let me find it right quick. Alright, here it goes. So boom, we have our name, we have the street, and we have the city. Again, because that's what we specified over here, right? So, damn it. There it goes. Again, name, street, city. If I provided the other ones, we get the other data as well. As you could tell, I didn't add a header. And that's fine. We could always go back and add a header. But I just want to kind of give you the fundamentals, right? It's really not that hard. You could tell we have our client list name on the bottom too. Our file name, right? So that's pretty much is based on what we specified over here, the title. And then of course the file name. But hopefully that gives you a better idea, right, on connecting to SharePoint, connecting to a SharePoint list to access data. And then, of course, in our case, if you weren't familiar with, well, now you know how to create a basic workbook and save your data to the workbook. It's really not that hard. Hopefully, y'all find this useful. Again, let me know, man. Give me some requests. Again, I made this video because they were requested by a few viewers, to be honest with you. So man, if there's anything else related to SharePoint or anything else, send me a message, and I may make a video of it. Again, man, thanks for watching. Hit that thumbs up, hit the like button, follow me. Again, I'm trying to grow my channel. Anything that I could do to help you out, by all means, let me know. Now I'll try to see how I could help you out with some knowledge, share some of my knowledge that I have. And thanks for watching. Peace.